When I was a young boy, I always had a fascination with legal and illegal street art. There was something so strangely appealing about the psychedelic canvas of colours on the walls of Doncaster that just enraptured me. My stepfather would sort of lament his fate as I constantly asked him for the meaning behind every coded phrase and distorted image. This fascination with colourful art continued into my adolescence as I had a budding interest in Picasso and Dali. Now I found a new captivation with the works of David Lynch, Hunter S. Thompson, and Suda51. Now, if you too share these passions, then get comfortable as I make a stumbling attempt to pay homage to this strange artistic movement known as Surrealism. Let's first consolidate what exactly Surrealism is. After the esoteric mousetrap of European alliances set off, causing the First World War, many artists across Europe were displaced. Now, come to the end of that brutal conflict, many of these artists, such as the renowned André Breton, began to create a subversive genre known as anti-art. This anti-art began as a critique of the bourgeoisie values that were seen as the cause of the Great War, but in coming years developed into Surrealism. Breton defined Surrealism as pure psychic automatism, by which one proposes to express either verbally, in writing, or by any other manner the real functioning of thought. Naturally, this means Surrealism finds itself rooted deeply in the unconscious mind, which leads to its bizarre features. Due to this, Surrealism is often confused with absurdism, and in some ways they take similar shapes. However, they are not to be confused with one another. Absurdist art forms attempt to understand life as it is without established politics, ideology, or morals, while Surrealism is instead an expression of the unconscious mind. One allure of the genre, to me at least, is its innate ability to take us to places far removed from conscious reality. Surrealism and dreams go hand in hand and often take on similar forms. They can both be disorientating, fantastical, terrifying, sentimental, whatever the mind chooses, and there is something so liberating about letting your psyche take the wheel. We tend to lead mundane, busy lifestyles. The world seems to grow more complicated day by day, and often we lose a sense of who we are. This is why I believe in modern times, Surrealism is one of our strongest expressions of humanity. To create Surrealism is difficult, for we are all so absorbed in the physical world, it seems impossible to let go. But doing so is an important step in understanding oneself. I would like to touch upon the works of Japanese game developer Suda51, who is known for his Kill the Past series. Particularly, I will be focusing on his 2004 cult classic, Killer 7. Killer 7 takes place in a peaceful future and follows a disabled government hitman with 7 personalities attempting to prevent a terrorist organisation called Heaven Smile from ending world peace.
Oh my God! I can't hold back! Oh God! Oh, I'm coming! Yeah! See, I told you, this is real!
The storyline has a tendency to introduce and remove characters just on a whim.
And who might you be? Women are all the same.
The game's also full of many unresolved loose ends, and it ends very abruptly. And it's for these reasons that I think it's easy to disregard Killer 7 as random or nonsensical. However, what must be understood about Surrealism is it is often deeply personal to the artist, and people consuming the art are going to come to different conclusions on what can be taken away from the tale. Although Suda 5.1 does have recurring themes through most of his games, those being Eastern culture versus Western culture, Taoist philosophy, and critiques of capitalism et al., his stories are by design going to be full of gaps for the person to fill with their own personal experiences. This is the beauty of surrealism. It is tantalizing to the senses, subjective to the observer, and is by design timeless.
Hey, I need some air. Point that air at me.
Another brilliant demonstration of surrealism would be the animated works of PilotRedSun. Pilot's works are immediately recognizable for their minimal yet oddly expressive nature. His worlds and characters are ugly to look at, but somehow your eyes struggle to avert themselves. His locations and dialogue are nonsensical, but familiar enough for your brain to be able to fill the gaps. Pilot's dreamy animations are accompanied by equally dreamy soundtracks, which serve to create a whimsical and/or unnerving atmosphere.
Have a treat.
A personal favourite cartoon of mine from Pilot's selection is Burners, which follows something of a 90s sitcom structure. Every act opens with the title card and a distorted piano theme song. We see the main duo, by some contrived circumstance, burned to death. For example, in the second act, we see the man in the green shirt warn his friend not to jostle the heating ducts because they are collecting his favourite iron dust. Unfortunately, his friend kicks his football into them, and the iron dust is ignited by a box of pre-lit candles. The friends are promptly incinerated. When the pair meet their fiery end, the theme song plays again, as though their deaths are the punchline to some kind of twisted joke. The animation stuck with me because I viewed it as a sort of vindictive punishment for the man in the orange shirt. All 3 times a fire is started, the man in orange is to blame. I believe he is sent into some kind of personal hell where the loss of his friend to a fire he started is repeated in different circumstances. The reason the circumstances around the fire are so contrived is because he's been in this sitcom hell for a very long time, and each new episode has to come up with a new narrative, no matter how ridiculous. But no matter what the man in orange does, fate will make sure he starts a fire. Other people have come up with differing theories on what PilotRedSun is trying to convey with this animation, ranging from it being a sitcom from another universe, to it being an interpretation of childhood trauma stemming from watching late-night television. PilotRedSun rarely replies to comments and almost never confirms anything about his themes, leaving many of his animations enigmas, but this radio silence works to increase the appeal of his work. I mentioned earlier that one of the greatest draws of surrealism is its ability to let the observer come to their own conclusions, and I believe PilotRedSun is well aware of this, keeping his own interpretation a secret. Truly, PilotRedSun is a modern surrealist visionary, whose work will be remembered for years to come.
I don't want to do this, but we gotta dump the Quaaludes.
It is difficult to talk about surrealism without briefly going back to the classic works of a certain Spanish painter. Although paintings have never been my areas of interest or expertise, Picasso has always stood out among the crowd to me. I have heard people describe the worlds he creates as distorted and even grotesque, but I see this as one of his greatest strengths. Let's take the example of one of his most prolific and prodigious anti-war paintings, Guernica. At first glance, it could seem to be a critique of warfare, showing political violence in all its unadulterated ugliness. This is of course as valid as any interpretation, but I think it's important to come up with your own subjective reactions. Notice that the painting is monochromatic, signifying that this painting is perhaps a memory or a photograph. The fur on the horse resembles newspaper clippings, the eye floating above perhaps the flash of a war journalist's camera. The eye could also represent fearful apathy, as those reading about the Spanish Civil War from abroad are removed from the violence, but not far from it, with Europe on the verge of a much larger war. This is further reinforced by the fact that the eye is north of the painting, just as the rest of Europe was geographically speaking. The people in Guernica are distorted and unrecognisable, as when we read news of wars we scarcely remember the faces of those it affects, barely acknowledging that these people exist. A harrowing painting indeed. Let's answer one of the questions that provoked me to make this homage in the first place. What is the appeal of Surrealism? It's difficult to pin down, but from these three wildly different pieces of media that I've covered, we can establish some appealing traits that they share. Surrealism has a unique look, so much so that people who are unfamiliar with the history and nature of Surrealism can still identify it. Its distortion of reality and fantastical nature carries a certain escapist allure. Surrealist art is subjective, and therefore can be relevant to anyone's personal experience, and allows us to be creative in our analyses of them. Finally, Surrealism allows us to connect further with our unconscious mind, an area of our psyche we often forget exists. To end this homage, I've written a short surrealist story of my own, based on my musings of the movement. A link will be in the description. I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it, and if you want to support me further, a link to my Ko-Fi is below. Thank you for your time.